people have a longing for spiritualism. Every single culture on the planet has a serpent entity at its foundation, and everybody has story for that. It's good to look through the eyes of that, to find that one in the deep dark, and where it bridges across seasonally through all the different layers of reality in order to know reality, in order to have a cosmology that you can align then with other people. We're in a post-truth era, but then our ontology, which is the actual reality and a way of knowing it, that's what is real. And what's real and true has become split. There's that kind of struggle going on all the time, and you kind of model yourself on the principles of the hero, to defeat the serpent. So in a way, you're still following the serpent, but the serpent's kind of been split into two different characters.
Welcome back to the Boundless Body. So check this out. 63.5% of you who are regular listeners haven't subscribed yet to the show. So please take a moment. It would be really helpful to click subscribe. It's free of charge. It will really help us out. In turn, we'll help you out by bringing you better and better content. Along those lines, send us an email with your feedback, boundlessbodypod@gmail.com. Send us your feedback about how you think we can do better. Give us questions to address on the show, interviewees you'd like us to interview. It'd be super helpful. Okay. Let's be a community. I'd like to welcome you with a big virtual bear hug.
Yo. Well, because our bodies are boundless in cyberspace right now.
Yeah. Tyson, we got Tyson Yunkaporta and his partner, Megan Kelleher. And the two of you have just co-authored a book, Snake Talk.
We have.
Yeah. Awesome. Where you look at world mythologies, world snake mythologies, some creation mythologies, some Ouroboros images. Yeah. Just looking at the snake. And I'm looking forward to, slithering around through the material with y'all.
Yeah. Well, it is omnipresent through all time and all place on this planet. Even in places that have no snakes, they do have sacred serpents. These are everywhere. Yeah.
Bizarre.
We have
places where there's no snakes.
Yeah. So New Zealand, and they still have it. The Taniwha there take serpent form, but they're kind of shapeshifters like all the serpents are. And in Ireland too, but we've got a whole chapter on the Irish serpents in the book. But that's Megan's wheelhouse, because she's practically Irish. She's got Irish dad and Aboriginal mum. So she's our Celtic expert here.
I wouldn't call myself a Celtic expert, but
in our house.
But I'm kind of like unwittingly a Celtic practitioner, just by way of, being.
Yeah. I mean, my family hails from Ireland too, before. And I'd like to say that, in Celtic, the Celts have just been thoroughly uprooted. We're like rootless.
Yeah.
Like the old rituals and traditions and the stories have just been deeply uprooted. And what do we have? Like Neo-Paganism? And Neo-Paganism is just just conjured out of thin air or something like that. It feels rootless to me. I've had some fun and some just like getting out and howling at the moon and, just getting into this, getting, I don't know, mud on my face and stuff like that. And that's been useful to me. But also there's still a sense of rootlessness insofar as the deep traditions go.
I think neo-paganism, it's a funny thing. It's always part of that, intense spiritual response to hard times. You know what I mean? So when a country or a continent is in complete upheaval, there is this retreat, to more and more weird forms of spirituality. Like in Russia, after the USSR fell, and they had this rapid, hardcore capitalist conversion overnight, and everything was in chaos, and oligarchs were emerging and just ripping everybody off, and people were starving. No one knew where to get their shoes from. It was, there was a big retreat into not just Russian Orthodox Church, which started getting weird as well, like lots of weird mythologies and theories, but then also this massive kind of a longing for the shamanism, of Siberia and all the different tribes. So they started tapping into that, but very quickly it flipped into more of the kind of New Age and Neo-Pagan sort of animism that was inflected a lot with like esoteric fascism.
Esoteric fascism. That sounds like
esoteric fascism is right through all that left-hand path and the magic, with a K, sort of, sorcery, traditions that are coming out, which kind of, I don't know, they kind of borrow heavily from the old ways, just bits and pieces, like, a rattle and a bone and we'll have that feather, but then they just go, right off into the weird Nazi stuff. It's pretty full on. You end up with like drum circles, that have like Canadian truckers, MAGA and yoga mums who are really into Gwyneth Paltrow, they're all just happy in the same drum circle. There's weirdness in the world. When things go really bad, like over the pandemic, that's when all the weird stuff comes out. People have a longing for spiritualism. It's important to, like you said, our Irish got spread out everywhere and lost a lot. We argue in the book that there's cultural power and longevity and diversity that makes a culture anti-fragile in diaspora. So when people are displaced and spread out, there are lots of seeds that are kept, and when people come back together and gather, you find that there's this whole sort of mosaic and whole cloth of a culture that starts to come back together. So we spend a lot of time with Irish law-keepers lately.
Mm-hmm. I personally am a big into the Shilana gig. You know the Shilana gig?
Shilana?
No, I don't know that.
Oh, hang on. The Shilana.
The Shilana
gig, like one word.
Yeah, it's basically one word, I believe, with some hyphen in there.
Okay.
Mm.
So it's not like a side hustle.
Yeah, it's on some of the old Irish churches where there's like this image of this feminine figure that's reaching down and opening up the vagina really wide, and it's mostly an effigy or a figure that's above the gateway into the church. And as the story goes, say again?
I just said, oh wow, yeah.
She changes in different seasons, as I understand it. Like sometimes she's Bridget, and then sometimes she's the hag. Yeah, and there's some pretty cool stories.
I think it's interesting that you talk about the Shilana gig. So that image that you've just described. So one of the people that we spoke with, two of them actually, we spoke to Lydia Campbell and Monken McGann, who has just recently left this realm. So they talk about the worm, WYRM, the great worm, the serpent in their lore, LORE. The worm is kind of like the keeper of, or the guardian of sacred waterways. And Lydia talks about how, the holy wells are described as like the vaginas of the earth. And so they're a sacred place. And I think it's really interesting that image that you've described kind of speaks to that. So we're actually talking about, in some way, the same thing, really.
Yeah.
Monken also published a book about women's words, and it's accompanied by beautiful images that almost illustrate, I would say, what you've just described. Beautiful images of what you could look at, if you sort of look at it with the right lens, I guess, effectively just women's body part, the vagina. Yeah, it's really
Brilliant.
beautiful. And some of them are, like images of menstrual flows, and some of them are depicted as gardens, and some of them are depicted as, it's a fantastic book. It's absolutely beautiful.
He showed us that the Gaelic language, like half of the words for different landforms and bodies of water, et cetera, in their language are just the names of women's body parts.
And this is another one of the beautiful things, that Monken's work was really about showing, was that so Monken is a giant of the Irish language, and has done a lot of revival work. His name is spelled Manchan, Magan, Magan. So he's gone back and really studied the rich Irish language and sees it as a portal effectively into kind of like other worlds that the people of Ireland were immensely and intensely aware of. And so, you might have a particular word that means, sort of 4 different things, and it shows these links of sort of like the very interpersonal or, deeply personal, and how that might link to, say, something out in the ocean, or it might be where you will find seaweed, or, and so there's these amazing sort of links between the landscape and the language, which is really similar to, Aboriginal language and law. And that's another sort of area where Monken has gone with his work, is looking at those similarities between, Irish cultural practice and Aboriginal practice. And so going back to that point that you made earlier about the sort of like rootlessness of, Irish culture or Celtic culture, the work that Monken has done really shows that, in fact, it's not. It's very, very based in landscape and place, and has a deep understanding of the seasonalities and what's there, and how by understanding the language and sort of reviving that language, that it is very much, anchored to place, and reflects a deep understanding of place and the phases of places, and is very respectful, like, has a sacred connection. And I think that, the rootlessness is a product of colonization. So, the Irish were also, colonized. I've heard that Ireland's greatest export is their people.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, so my Irish connection is a result of one of those exports. James Kelleher, migrated from Ireland to Victoria in southeast Australia back in the 1840s, I think, somewhere, from Knockraheen in Ireland.
What do you reckon is the symbolic takeaway for St. Patrick whistling away the snakes out of Ireland?
That came down from Persian, Zoroastrian.
Oh, yeah.
The St. George thing from England, and St. Patrick from Ireland, and a lot of those ones where the Catholic Church was sort of, you've got the hero slaying the dragon, which sort of, became central to European mythology. That struggle, so that started with the Zoroastrian myth, with those Ashtar sort of dragons. So Zoroastrianism, like, being the first sort of monotheistic religion, in the sense that, this is the only religion and everything else is wrong, kind of thing. A big, massive, totalizing civilization building thing that sort of supported kings and temples and things like that. It was the first religion to do that. And so there was a kind of a separating of the two sides of the serpent, as creator and destroyer, which is the foundational thing. a separation of that, the good and evil, so that the dragon or serpent just became pure evil, and then the good side, became the hero. And, but it's funny because, every person in that religion and, even in Islam, you've got that, and most religions now, there's that struggle, inside yourself, between, your best self and your worst self. There's that kind of struggle going on all the time, and you kind of model yourself on the principles of the hero, to defeat the serpent. So in a way, you're still following the serpent, but the serpent's kind of been split into two different characters, which weirdly kind of actually, marries the serpent into the human, but through that sort of more dualistic, expression, which is pretty interesting. I guess we'll get into the archetype stuff later, but you see that a lot, I don't know, in interpretations, of that archetypal psychology stuff. There's a lot of stuff about dragons that's a bit different.
Michael, I think it's Archangel Michael is the one that's stepping on a serpent of some kind, right?
Yeah.
With a kind of holy sword.
Well, it became that became really swallowed into the, that whole what do they call it? The white man's burden, but they called it something. Anyway, that sort of idea of, that imperative of taming savage lands and savage peoples and bringing them into the light. Manifest Destiny, it was called. Yeah, it kind of became tangled up in that, so that sort of heroes and knights slaying beasts and monsters and dragons, that kind of became a symbol for, a lot of the, savage cultures of the world kind of thing.
So the colonizer who's like the good snake or the whitewashed pure one, and then the bad snake, the evil, colonized, the animal, the instincts, the shadowy, the shadow projection, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So that the white person can, maintain their claim to purity. They gotta,
well, and that's just what, because it began in Persia. That whole story began in Persia, like, thousands of years ago, before Europeans were like still running around, following the worm law and painting themselves blue and shooting stone-tipped arrows at each other when the Zoroastrians were building temples and cities, and you know what I mean? And following killing the dragon. So that story started way back.
Yeah, I think they're using white as the kind of symbolic or alchemical element, which is a symbol of purity. What doesn't, whoever it is, that claim, I call it toxic innocence.
White just means different things in different countries. Sure. It's kind of just a stand-in for like a caste system, I guess. And, like in India, that, whiteness is that sort of Brahmin caste, and that's sort of turned into a class system and an economic sort of thing now too. The governing class or caste of a society is, that's sort of what whiteness means. Sort of got confused with pale skin as we went along, but white means a very different thing in like most of South America, for example, than what it means, in America, like in the US and in Australia.
The chapter in Snake Talk about Tanifa, is that how you say it? Tanifa?
Yeah.
The Maori snake. It's a sea snake of some kind, or a sea dragon, or a serpent, yeah?
Yeah. Well, it took sea snake form, but then other forms as well as it traveled from their sort of spiritual, mythical homeland of like Hawaii, I don't know how to say it now. But so where they came from before they got to New Zealand. And I guess there's a lot of speculation as to where that is. Like some people even say it's Taiwan, yeah, which is interesting. Yeah. So and they were guided and their serpents sort of traveled with them, in that the sea snake form, but then shape-shifted into, whales, dolphins, even floating logs, as they traveled along. And then when they got to New Zealand, they all took up residence in different freshwater, creeks, streams, rivers, lakes, and lived in there. And then, of course, they changed form there too. So you end up with, these sort of serpentine forms that are kind of like, lizard fish kind of things, and that kind of take on the forms, of that place. But they shapeshift back and forth into different, into human figures, etc. So, I mean, my rainbow snake from Far North Queensland, in my clan, Upledge clan, our story place there, Moving Stone, that's a Taipan place. And he shapeshifts, like he takes the form of a headless man sometimes, or a rainbow, and, lightning, and, and this big serpent as well. So they all kind of shapeshift, all these snake beings.
So you write about some personal narratives, some family narratives in that chapter. Something about Bitcoin, or in the Tanifa chapter, Maori. Been a little bit since I've read it.
Tangled up with that, I don't know, that whole meme coin thing. It was really weird because it was just at the start of the Trump, this latest Trump presidency, Trump coin, was this meme coin that was sort of, really taking off, and, people who wanted to, gain favor would like buy up heaps of his meme coin and invest in that. I mean, around that time, there was one of our relatives, a cousin, like, he was experimenting with TikTok. He kind of wasn't really, he was sort of just coming into the internet. And, he went on TikTok and he was recording a video there, but obviously didn't really understand that he was recording a video. So it's just his face, sort of looking at the screen for a couple of minutes and looking around. And he posted that up. And that was the FaceTime prank guy, which went viral because, when that FaceTime came out, where you could call somebody, do a video call, but put a different video face there, as a, what do they call them? Not a wallpaper or a filter, or I think it's a filter. Yeah, you put that on as a filter.
I don't know if it was a filter. I think it was just people like holding their camera up to their laptop or something, and it had, his image there.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how they were doing it, but so basically
people would call from like, so a daughter's phone, for example, and then they call the father, and the father would answer the phone expecting to see his daughter. And there's just this, an
image of an Aboriginal man.
Yeah. And
just looking at
an
his
Aboriginal
camera.
guy just looking, silently into the screen. And so they were recording, these responses of, somebody is like, what have you done with my daughter? Like panicking because, and anyway, that really blew up. And it ended up like there's millions and millions and millions of views of his TikTok channel. Then everyone was using it and doing the prank. So his face and name and image sort of went viral.
It wasn't so much, I don't think his name.
No, his name did, because that's how the meme coin came in.
Oh.
Because after a while, like he became the meme. And, yeah.
And then so you go on to talk about protection and supporting him from the kind of spiritual consequences
Yeah, because in our way, image and spirit are the same thing. Like it's the same word.
Yeah.
Mine is like, that's your spirit, like your shadow, spirit, your image, and a shadow is that same thing, so in our way, you can't let your shadow fall on somebody. That kind of, it makes sickness. It's, your shadow brings bad stuff with it, yeah. And so the image of a person, like if a person passes away, you have to cover up or destroy all photos of them, etc. So an image carries power. So even when you're doing the sand talk, like drawing images on the ground, you have to rub them out afterwards. So yeah, image has power. So your image and your name are both connected to your spirit. So you can't call out someone's name with feeling, or use their name with feeling when they're not present, because you're actually, in a way, you're cursing them like that. And so for a while, his image and his name became this kind of meme coin that was being traded on that platform. And his image was replicated millions of times. So I keep talking to our communities about this. Like, we talk about data sovereignty, but I keep talking about the spiritual harm of having, part of your spirit captured and then replicated infinitely in the cloud, which is like this whole other unseen shadow world, spirit world, and what that does to you. It's like all these little, like Horcruxes from, like in Harry Potter, bits of your spirit all being broken up and viewed by other people, and people are looking at it and calling out mean things about you, calling your name, with feeling, out in the world. And there's this kind of curse happening to people all the time. Yeah. And I don't know, that might explain a lot, but yeah, that's what we're kind of looking at.
What was most creepy was, an AI thing that I found. And somebody had, AI is extraordinary, in terms of the video production that's coming out. And so somebody had an image of him, I think he was like walking down the street at some point, and then he was like sitting in a basement with like nooses and people kind of like behind him as though he'd kind of like kidnapped people and was holding them prisoner or whatever.
Yeah. Like
so there was
serial killer.
Yeah, like as if he was some kind of serial killer. And it was just, it was just like, for me, I just kind of thought, what does that do to the idea of a person who is actually an extremely gentle, person of deep integrity? Is this Eric
that's
here?
the book there, but yeah.
I'll lift those.
Just keep talking and sort that out.
Yeah, because we've got a book here that Tyson's just lifting off the pile.
There was
so that's Eric there.
National photography competition. So this photographer, Wayne Quilliam, took like a very like an award-winning photo. Cousin. So I don't know if you can imagine that guy, but without the paint and feathers, just like staring into a screen. Yeah, he sort of became. The joke was that he's this menacing figure, like a really strange, dark person. Sort of unfamiliar, especially to Americans, who kind of have a picture of what a black person is, it sort of became this figure of menace, so
when
all the AI
totally
videos, the AI videos were, of sort of him, kidnapping and like murdering, white people and all this sort of thing. So, yeah, it was really weird.
He's someone of deep integrity and, and upholds the law and is someone who actually, represents his community for ceremony. So, it's just like, what? Like to see this opposite.
It was like a curse, with the family, because it really, really disrupted spiritually, and it's like on every level, the whole family. There was like bad luck, accidents, sickness, everything just sweeping through the whole family, extended family, and we were really doing it tough here. But then, my brother, who's, neurodivergent and needs constant care and attention, you got to make sure he doesn't wander off on his own because he'll get in trouble, he wandered off and nobody saw. And he went down to the river, and for the first time in our whole tribe's history, an Aboriginal person was taken by a crocodile. And that was him. So my brother got eaten by a crocodile in the middle of all that, which is unheard of because, we always know where the crocodiles are and where you can go. We don't have a fight or flight sort of thing with predators because we're related to the predators, And it was weird because, like, crocodile is one of the forms that rainbow snake serpent shifts into here, and I think in other places in the world too. So, it really disturbed us a lot, and but they ended up, when they recovered his remains from the stomach of the crocodile, they had to send it to a special forensics lab in New Zealand. At the same time as we're having these dialogues with Maoris, about the tangiwha, suddenly, our brother's remains are there. And we haven't done the ceremonies, we haven't done the funeral or the mourning things, so his shadow spirit hasn't been, taken care of, and the rest of his spirit hasn't been taken care of. And so he's just wandering around and everybody's getting sicker and sicker. And but I was able to contact the Maori mobs that I know over there who could care for him, and they all did ceremony. But they had to innovate new ceremony for that unusual situation, of somebody untethered staying for many months in Aotearoa. So they had to protect his spirit, but they also had to protect themselves from his spirit and from the crocodile spirit that followed them there. Because they don't have crocodiles, and they like hate lizards. They see lizards as really bad luck things because they haven't got many of them. They just got a few skinks. And when they see them, they're like, there's that evil thing, So it's, it's pretty full. It was pretty full on. And sort of and that kind of, forced us into, because we'd sort of set all the tech stuff aside because it's a big topic in our house because Megan is doing her doctorate, around blockchain and automated decision making, and in how that could affect and be affected by Indigenous governance sort of systems. So we're always talking about Bitcoin and bloody AI and hard forks and all the rest, and the sort of different governance models that come out in those situations. So we're always talking about that here, and then all of a sudden it was like, well, that entered the story, which I guess culminated then in the final chapter, which is looking at the Basilisk, what emerged, in the tech world around this new Basilisk, this Roko's Basilisk. Which is
Megan, can you talk about the Basilisk? Can you
certain form of
name
future AI?
Tyson just named blockchain and how you're doing your doctorate.
The Roko's Basilisk was this thought experiment about a future artificial general intelligence. Which solves all the world's problems, but then is sort of sitting there thinking, I could have solved this faster and sooner if those bastards weren't blocking my development back in the day, So I will punish those people who either did not fully support or did not throw all their resources behind, bringing me into existence, or the people who tried to block it with ethical AI and, limits on AI and all that sort of thing. So he then punishes all those people, realizing that somebody in the past would imagine his existence and therefore imagine his displeasure and his punishment of. And so that became like a curse that ended up like people went crazy about it and were like, that's such an unethical thought experiment because you brought something into being that now, you know, we're forced to.
Yeah, it's like it exists now.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like there's this potentiality of it in the future. And,
Yeah.
you know, what does that mean for us? And, you know, like I remember reading one response and it was like, are you an idiot? You know, it's just kind of like, you know, yeah, it was taken really, really seriously because it's kind of like, you know, playing with time in some way, that you're bringing forth into a future, you know, existence. It's sort of like, reminds me of 12 Monkeys, you know, that cycle where, you know, they kind of go into this sort of like loop.
With
Do you know the film 12 Monkeys?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it sort of reminds me of. That's how seriously it was taken too.
Yeah.
Why would you even entertain the idea of sort of setting something like this in motion?
And that also, you know, came alongside a lot of, you know, Megan's, you know, thesis that talking about, you know, automated decision making, you know, blockchain AI, but around, I don't know, there was a story given to her from an elder in South Australia. I don't know if you want to talk about that or if you still wanted to keep it to yourself.
I think I might. So effectively, it's a story about, and I'm just going to kind of contain it a little bit because I write about it and work it through. Yeah, effectively, it's about. I'm just trying to think of a way to sort of express it and tie it into the Basilisk.
Evil entity.
Yeah, that it's, well, okay, so this particular entity relies on populism. It's a mask, or it wears a mask, and it sort of becomes, I suppose, what you think you need, or adapts itself to, you know, like the thing that you think you need at the time. And so then it
like
actually
idealizations.
Yeah, and it gains power through populism. So in actual fact, you know, you're kind of like on the wrong track, and it's becoming, you know, like you believe in the wrong story, effectively. So that's what this particular, it's a creation story, and it's a warning to be on the lookout for this particular entity that will inevitably arrive, and that you have to sort of see whether or not it's an illusion, and you have to be able to see behind the illusion and understand that it's actually tricking you.
Behaves like an adaptive algorithm.
Yeah, and it's sort of like it changes its form, so it's a sort of I suppose a shapeshifter in a bad way, to kind of like continue becoming what it is that you sort of, that it's telling you, I guess, that you need. It's hard to sort of put into
matching. Yeah, I guess it's reflecting the desires of audience community, but then representing that back in ways that nudge those desires towards something else until it becomes this collective sort of desire that is then manipulated, I guess, and changes and grows and gathers its, you know, so it's like an entity.
Interesting.
You know, like you see with a lot of, you know, conspiracy theory sort of communities and you know, stuff like this, and you know, and the way that sort of comes into governance and politics in general, you know, now, and how much AI is playing that role. You know, how many bots are out there in social media, like, you know, reflecting back, you know, people's, you know, desires and self-images, but then shifting it and nudging them all towards a kind of collective, wrong sort of story. I guess it follows that same thing we were talking about earlier of, you know, in hard times, you know, how people you know, sort of really retreat into intense spiritualism, but then these kind of, shift and take on bizarre forms.
I guess, like, if you would think of it from a Christian, like a biblical narrative, there are scriptures in the Christian Bible that talk about an angel of light. And so it's like there are these warnings about these angels of light that will appear, that will sort of, kind of tell you what, you sort of want to believe, and then you go off and follow that down the path. But in actual fact, you needed to be on the lookout for it and test whether or not, it's actually telling you the truth, or whether there's some kind of, I guess it's a kind of, is it tied up with your own ego? Or, I've heard people talk about, is this my ministry or is this God's ministry? And I think, like the American quilts, when we were over in Indiana a couple of years ago, we were taken to an Amish village.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first time that I'd actually understood that the patchwork quilts, the designs on the patchwork quilts were actually a reflection or sort of a metaphor, if you will, of how the individual piece is not kind of like, it's critical in the overall design, but it's not just one big piece, or there's not, there's this balance of sort of like all of these individual pieces that are intricately kind of connected to make this overall fabric. And so in a way, that's sort of like what that metaphor that I was just describing is about. It's about understanding your place within a fabric, but not kind of getting too ahead of yourself. And I think that that angel of light kind of concept, or the that creation story that I was describing earlier without actually naming it, it's about that same thing. It's about sort of not being misled, and you can be misled if you are out of balance. And I think that, my own personal sort of take on it at the moment, just through some of the reading that I've been doing, is about how this system that we're in is really fundamentally kind of built on three aspects, being scarcity, scarcity, isolation, and fear. And so I think if you're sort of, if any of those ideas are kind of dominating your thinking, or if you're out of balance in any of those areas, then I think you can be kind of misled. And so this is what the Basilisk story potentially is about, really, it's about the idea that, because you would probably be better, Tyson, able to speak directly to this, but it's about this idea that the wealthy few, it was right for them to be powerful, and
that was the perversion.
Yeah, that's the perversion of the story.
So this was the only serpent that we found that wasn't that didn't have really good law, and there's this kind of universal pattern of serpents, even when they split into knights killing dragons. It's still about the better angels of your nature coming, of human nature coming to the fore. But the basilisk, like, it was all right when it was a Greek mythological being, because it was only like a foot long, this little serpent that had this poisonous breath and was just like a horrendous thing, but it could be killed by a weasel, and there was good story for that. But then when the British picked up the idea of the basilisk, they made it into this massive avenging entity that was just about tilting power, towards nobility, against the masses, but particularly around accumulation of power, influence, and wealth. That it was sort of an avenging figure that would defeat evil in the form of the masses, the enslaved, the oppressed, who were sort of it was that fascist turn thing of like, oh, all these slaves, like, who don't love us because we're killing them and oppressing them, really they're oppressing us. And, the basilisk will turn them to stone with his gaze, but not us because we're the nobility. It was this weird thing. So it got written into the King James, the first revised King James Bible. They actually just put it in there. Like, they just went, here, we'll put a basilisk in here, and a fiery serpent. To do that. And then you had the Romance poets were writing, that they were all into that because they were all sort of, aristocratic, syphilitic, bloody dragon chasers themselves with the old opium. And so this weird basilisk came through. And it's funny that it was the basilisk that became the serpent of AGI, artificial general intelligence. This sort of god coming in through, binary code. And moving from the future to the present in this weird curse move. It was interesting that was taken up to be the AGI thing, simply because it's the same thing, like the philosophies of, Curtis Yarvin and all that kind of thing, Moldbug or whatever, that they're all kind of following, all the Peter Thiels and the Musks and everything else. They have that focus on, long-termism and effective altruism, which very much, contain this idea of returning to a kind of a monarchic kind of rule, kings and nobility. There's a whole heap of weird, fantastical stuff that comes out of that, but that is the kind of the colonizing, like a neo-colonizing, like imperial drive that Megan kept seeing coming through in her study of all Bitcoin and smart contracts, automated decision-making, AI, and particularly, how these were being used. I don't know, you'd have to talk about that, like in Polynesia and, places like this, how it was being used to sort of get people to sign over their sovereign title to lands, It was being used to rip off indigenous peoples and sort of, colonize and recolonize.
And vampirize. Anyway. I mean, I really like this image of the creator shapeshifter versus the destroyer shapeshifter, and that there's elements where it's hard to discern what shapeshifter is among us.
Yeah. Well, that's where you've got to discern between right destruction and right creation.
That's a chapter in the book. Yeah.
Wrong creation, wrong destruction. But that's the Viking chapter. Because the Orm and the Jormungandr, the world snake, who's constantly doing battle with Thor, that's that's like that's where we really found the best example of that. There was in the Guriala rainbow snake story from Cape York, but then there was also and that was interesting alongside the Danish Viking stories.
So you have like Yggdrasil, or however you say. How do you say that? World tree. Yggdrasil.
Yggdrasil. It's the world tree.
This Mundi in the middle. As the kind of shamanistic ladder where with the above world and the spirit creatures above, and then the chthonic world, the subterranean world, and then wrapped around the whole thing, including the tree, right? The great world tree is this snake. Yeah.
Yep. And it's constantly sort of like twirling around. And I had this really awesome video of it on my phone, like my last phone that died. And I think the photos died along with it, or the video, because there was a Viking exhibition at the Melbourne Museum. And it was, one of those sort of short-term exhibitions that comes along, and they had like a Viking boat and all sorts of cool stuff. But there was this digital display that kind of depicted Yggdrasil. And I just remember this snake just kind of like going around it, it was just always, going around. And you could sort of like, how you get those really cool interactive displays where you can move things around. And it was, you could sort of like go around it and go through it, zoom in. And it was, it was awesome.
So we're interacting with this law, like, and knowing nothing about it. But then we've had we spent so much time with Rune the Viking, who was reporting all these stories to us, and the Lindworm story, which is really sexy kind of story about a naked girl like flogging with branches and lie this sort of scun bloody lump of a snake, a big serpent, in order to tame him and then bed him and turn him into a handsome prince. Kind of like, oh man, how many Beauty and the Beast stories do we come across all around the world involving serpents? Holy crap.
Where the snake turns into like the ideal...
came and stayed with us. He's just recently, he came and stayed with us in this house. So we actually got to spend a lot of time with him, I got really deep into the Danelaw and, it was pretty exciting.
Just when you talked about Yggdrasil and the upper world, I guess, and the below world, it's really interesting that you raised that because in some way, and without wanting to sort of labor the point of AI and that kind of thing, but definitely the digital kind of realm. And, when you talked about, you asked the question about sort of like, how do you identify or how do you know, when the destroyer is among us or the creator is among us, how can you tell? And what comes to mind for me is I feel as though it's about sort of being connected with, like, our bodies are intimately connected with the land. And, it's not just a physical thing, but it's a spiritual thing as well. And I think that, we can see, there's a bit of an epidemic of it certainly happening in Australia at the moment, since the COVID lockdowns, and particularly in Melbourne, where we had nearly 2 years of successive lockdowns. And so you had, teenagers spending all day in their bedrooms online because they had to go to school online, they had to do their extracurricular stuff online. And then at the end of the day, when school was finished, in order for them to kind of maintain their social networks, because we weren't allowed to connect with anybody physically in person, they were then, continuing to be online, and spending all this time on TikTok or, Snapchat or whatever it might be. And so now we're just seeing these, this sort of acceleration in, or, certainly an uptick. I don't know if acceleration is the right word, but just an uptick in the levels of anxiety and depression and, like social anxiety. And I kind of feel as though, it's our bodies telling us that what we need is community, and we need to be connected to the earth and to place. And when you're prevented from being able to see a horizon or go and put your feet in a river or, all of those things that we naturally would, have access to, when we're deprived of those things, then we have these psychological, disturbances. And so I think that, the answer to that question of how do we know whether it's the creator or the destroyer that's among us, I think we kind of have to listen to ourselves and then also see what's happening, at a social level, and looking at things at scale. And, you've only got to look at the news and see, there's just so much disturbance occurring globally, whether it be politically or emotionally or, climactically, looking at, the impacts on the environment, that I think that that's what we kind of tune into and say, all right, something's not right. We need to assess whether the ways that we're engaging, whether it be with each other or whatever it is, are we actually being misled some way?
Tie all this together, back through to Yggdrasil and psychology too, you know. So, you know, in psychology, you've got those sort of kind of 4 layers of, you know, persona and, you know, id, ego, superego kind of thing. You know, you've got that, you know, the subconscious, and then, you know, you're conscious, and then, you know, it goes up in those layers. Those kind of 4 layers, we found them in almost every, like Asian and Viking and Celtic, you know, there are these realms, you know, and the kind of the deep dark is the void of pre-creation, you know, and that's the realm of the serpent, because he was the first one to emerge. He didn't even really need to be created. He just came out of it, or was pre-existing. So he can keep returning there. And so it's like women and serpents that are kind of the adepts who can move into that realm and move between, which is why everybody's terrified of both of those entities, you know. We found this in the Amazon and the Andes as well. You know, it's those same kind of layers. And so you've got the serpent down in the roots of Yggdrasil. You've got it around the base of all the statues, you know, in Hindu and Buddhist, and the weird fusion of that right across Asia. You know, it's the Nags and Nagas around the base of things. The serpent is always at the foundation, and it's lower. And, you know, and weirdly, you see women being sort of placed lower as well. As people become afraid of that deep dark. But what's interesting, you know, so you've got all these layers, and, you know, in our way, there's sort of 4 parts of your spirit as well. This is that shadow part that I mentioned before, but that's kind of all the junk of your attachments and personality and stuff like that sort of lingers and longs for things, and just kind of, you know, goes around trying to find images of itself and its name and the places that it loves and the people that it longs for, and all its anger and all that kind of thing. So that's the one you got to get rid of, you know. There's your ancestral spirit that goes back to a special place that was born out of the land. So it goes back to that to come back around again. You know, then there's your big spirit, which is not much is known about that unless you're at higher levels of initiation. But that belongs in the sky camp, sky realms, you know. And then there's just your living spirit that is just always flowing through you like a river, you know. So it's like you're a string bag in a river, and this water's always flowing through, and your living spirit is kind of attached to everything else, you know, and that animates your body and sort of, so you've got all these 4 parts of spirit in our way, and you keep seeing that come around. But then you see this extra layer being added into creation of this cloud, you know, in computing. And then you see this extra layer being added to people, you know, that is another thing, you know, which is kind of that mask sort of business, and those projections that Megan was talking about with that traditional story from South Australia. And you see it, and it's so a person's profile, you know, becomes part of profile, and their, what do they call it? Their brand. Everybody has a profile, but people make it themselves based on their responses, the responses they get from this public that they're desperate to, you know, present something to. And so that's how you as an influencer, you know, and us as authors and, you know, people who do podcasts, you know, we suffer then from audience capture, because we're constantly being nudged towards what Megan was called populism, you know, the
get us out of here.
Get us out here. You're in a feedback loop because you're giving bloody influencer wisdom and knowledge to your audience. And then, you know, they're like responding with the parts they like, which then nudges your message. Next minute, you know, we're talking about freaking psychological archetypes, and suddenly the dragon is women and feminism. And you got to slay the dragon. It's like,
and then meanwhile,
so
this image is coming to mind of this, like, this toxic shapeshifter cloud-based network field, and it's just vampiric. It just sucks all of the blood out of a space. It just like vampire. It just
and maybe it is this time traveling bloody AGI basilisk, you know, that's sort of already planted itself in our heads through a thought experiment curse, you know. Oh, and that was weird too, because there was this cult that came out of that. The Zizian cult, which is worth a rabbit hole, which is just very entertaining. They ended up like doing mass murders and things. It was full on. This is only recent. It's like last year, man.
Oh,
Oh.
wow.
But it's interesting, you know, when you talk about the brand thing, like, and also the, yeah, you know, that toxic sort of, and like, you know, because we're going to be on a podcast, people can't see what you've been doing, you know, but like, you know, you're like holding your hands up and pulling your hands apart and, you know, kind of like swirling your hands around. And it's, you know, and it's this whole bodily thing that you're doing to kind of describe what's actually sort of, you know, coming to mind for you, I think. You know, there's this tearing and there's this sort of like, there's this stirring kind of, you know, it's like a disturbing things that probably should be settled, or it's unsettling, you know. And when we get stuck in these kind of, you know, like social media habits, and, you know, this kind of connects back to that earlier story about, you know, teenagers having social anxiety and all that. Like our brains, if, you know, for those who may not know, but you're having a dopamine response every time, you know, you see a like, or, you know, if you get sort of like a positive response and there's a whole bunch of people who kind of like your thing or support your thing or whatever, or share it or whatever, you're actually getting like a dopamine response to that. So it's sort of like, you know, satisfying this desire for like human connection that you would normally get if you are like literally sort of, you know, like with people and talking to them, and, you know, so it's like a social engagement, and so that kind of feeds it.
And yeah, and then meanwhile, it's the basilisk beast of envy is getting fed, because I think that envy is an underrepresented topic throughout psychology, social media. So in parallel to me getting a dopamine hit is me getting an envy hit, because I never, because of idealization, right? Because I can never quite live up to the polished, curated shit out there that we're all putting out there to the world, and I can never live up to that. So I get the dopamine hit, plus the basilisk is getting fed, this envious basilisk, that where I'm never good enough. And it's not, you know, imposter syndrome is archetypal, and it just feeds on that. It just, you know, like the snake gnawing at the roots of the world tree.
Well, they use the same maths and algorithms as for gambling.
Yeah.
To decide when you get the, you know, as the mouse in the maze, when you get the dopamine pellet, and when you get frustrated by not getting it.
And that's really like, that is
that's
documented.
What keeps you spending,
you know, it's
money.
in the literature that the algorithms of these social media, you know, things are designed on poker machines.
Yeah.
So yeah.
One yarn
originally.
One yarn I want to pull on before we close today is actually Venus. So I don't know if I'm going to say this word correctly, because it's a First Nations person of Australia word. Barnum beer. Am I saying that correctly? Barnum beer pole?
Barnum beer.
A pole. Barnum beer pole. It represents Venus, does it not?
Okay.
And it's a pole that's ritualized often during dancing.
Where is this?
In Arnhem Land, in particular.
Oh, okay.
Might be a Yolngu.
Oh, okay. Well, I know some of that. I think that's tied in with Seven Sisters stuff as well. Yeah.
So there's an interesting, when you're talking about Celtic stuff, you're talking about situatedness on land. And the term came to mind because the term I talk about this in my book, it's called Astro-Archeology. And the Aboriginal folk were astro-archaeologists, and so were the Celts. And Venus was one of the primary objects in the sky, presences in the sky, that both cultures ritualized.
Yeah.
Okay. So like in Scotland somewhere, they sacrificed, or into a really interesting article, they sacrificed the king every Venus cycle is, I think it's called a synodic cycle, which is every 8 years. Where
8
Venus,
years
where,
when it transits through Pleiades.
That's right.
And that's the Seven Sisters story that is the same in the northern and southern hemisphere.
Fuck yeah. So they killed the Irish king every 8 years synodic cycle at this particular Astro-Archeological site where the megalithic stones are set up just so to highlight how Venus is going through the Pleiades. And then I ran into some interesting literature about how Venus was ritualized in similar ways on Arnhem Land through Barnumbeer.
Probably without the sacrifice.
Probably
different stuff too.
The sacrifice could have been, an all night long dance.
Yeah,
which is,
well, there's always the same as everywhere. There's the seventh sister, the young silly one, who ends up remaining on Earth and sort of stuck in between and going back and forth because she goes with a man here, she's starts sleeping with an earthly human man.
Could be a
there's
snake,
the whole
right?
Orion is the hunter, chasing the seven sisters through the sky, and there's a serpent chasing them. And the guy that's chasing them in one story in Arnhem Land, he sings his penis into the form of a big carpet python, which the women sort of hunt in the swamp to get because they weren't going to eat it for dinner, but it turns out it's his dick, and there's all these full-on things. And there's stuff there with the frost, being coming from Venus in that transit, and the way that's used for adornment in different ceremonies. They're a bit more secret, though. But what's not a secret, though, is the Swedish, the Swedish one, which is, in that cycle as well. It's like the Aun myth and festival.
AUN.
AUN, and that's very cool. So it's this Swedish king who achieved immortality by he had to sacrifice one of his sons every 8 years in order to remain youthful, forever. But it ended badly, as all things do.
Are you familiar with, there's a documentary that was done, I think it was in the 80s. It was some Czech ballet dancer that organized this intertribal dance on Arnhem Land. He's a Czech choreographer, and he brought together, he was an intertribal, and they basically ritualized Venus and had an all-night long dance. It's called On Stamping Ground. It's wonderful image of the tribal, tribes coming together to dance all night. And one of the images that brought the tribes together was the image of Venus. Venus, being a shapeshifter, because different tribes have a different language and different stories and different narratives about and how Venus is dressed, as it were. But the principle of Venus brought the tribes together, and the act of dancing made it all come alive. And I really thought that was innovative. You mentioned innovative.
That's the idea of embassy, cultural embassy and exchange, that we also bring out as a principle throughout the book. And we have suggestions for how people can approach that in their original human ways. And there's always that, you gather and you exchange gifts and you do ceremony together and you dance and you share your stories, through those ways. That's what you do at the borders. That's what border work is traditionally. Borders are places for making kin. And then you can't invade each other once you've done that, because then you're marrying each other and having sex with each other's, people, and you're adopting kids back and forth, and you become entangled, through that sort of trade and that exchange. And it's interesting because the French, and they had a bit of a colonizing thing, didn't they, going on Age of Discovery and right the way through. Yeah, and they even kept them after decolonization. after the war. But when they came here before the British came. And they landed, at like La Perouse and different places. And they danced. There's written reports about these big dances, because that's how they communicated. They decided to dance with these people. And so it became this big ritual gathering, and they would dance for days together. And, and then they were hosted and learned a lot of things. And then they just got back on their ships and left. They didn't claim or take the territory or anything, because they couldn't, because they were in relation, through that ceremony. That's really interesting. The British didn't dance when they came.
I'm not surprised there.
And the Dutch didn't dance when they came 500 years ago. That's why we speared them. That was actually my clan that speared.
They get a...
But that also started the world's first corporation, because that journey failed so much. When they got back, all the investors, put what was left of the crew into bloody debtor's prison. So they invented this idea of the corporation and of finance. And, the Dutch East India Company was formed, and, as a result of my clan spearing some Dutchmen, because they didn't ask a lady to dance first. Enough said.
So one of the dreams I go off on in my book is a dream where I get in a time machine and travel back 60,000 years to, I think it's called Medjugorje. It's the old, ancient archaeological site in northern Darwin, is it not?
Right.
I think is it called Medjugorje? It's the oldest archaeological site in Australia.
You're not thinking of Budge Bin?
Close to
I know.
Land.
Yeah, okay,
But
no.
it's like 60,000 years old, and it's sitting on top of all of this uranium, all these uranium deposits and stuff like that. So ancient.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that, but yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
And then there was all this mining of the uranium that took place. And so I had this kind of dream where I traveled back in time to 60,000 years ago at this shelter, where there's things written on the sides of the rock, and, what would those ancient folks have to teach us right now about the snakes, about how to differentiate between, the creator shapeshifter and the destroyer shapeshifter. Just want to invite you into that dream for a second.
Well, there's that, there's that warning about uranium, to leave it in the ground. It's something you're not allowed to dig up. It's a forbidden thing in our way. And I think up that way, there's a big blue-tongue lizard story. We had these skinks in Australia that are quite large, and they have blue tongues. And the blue-tongue lizard story there is about his tongue is blue because of the toxic, terrible uranium. And that's the cautionary tale of leaving that in there. What's really interesting, though, is the blue-tongue lizard. Well, he's the one who bites the head off my clan's rainbow snake. And that's the reason why when he takes a man's form, the rainbow snake doesn't have a head. And all I can think about, it's weird because it's it's eating the serpent's head that makes his tongue blue, which is like really weird when you think about Shiva with his blue throat, because he has the Naga venom, which is also the elixir. It's the tongue there. Like, so all I can think about is that blue throat. Sorry, so that's where that
we just reacted, just for your audience, we just reacted to Brian's tattoo. There's a blue symbol on Brian's throat. Yeah, cool.
We got Shiva's fork. So what we did I carved the book anyway into this serpent sculpture, and it's this weird serpent that has all the stories, from the feathered. So there's our type at the top, but then the feathered serpents of Latin America. There's Africa there.
Oh, where's the camera? There it is. There's the camera. Oh, it's got a blue tongue.
Yeah,
Wow,
it's got the blue. from Shiva. But then
Rip
there's
the head
also,
off the rainbow serpent.
you also find Shiva's fork there. Fork's a rude word in our culture, but anyway. Yeah, but there's also, you can see Excalibur there, and that's the dragon slaying stuff.
I love this image of biting the head off, and this transformation of biting the head off the rainbow serpent. And then you got the poison becomes the medicine, as it were.
Well, in sort of higher levels of knowledge and initiate sort of stuff, there's a lot of stuff I can't talk about, but that's sort of involves the reasons why you don't really need a head. That head isn't the most important part of you, and what does the thinking, and how important, like the gut and the heart, areas, ngunk pitin and nyanwi, all this, all this stuff is. Maybe we don't need heads.
It just reminds me of an insect little documentary that I saw on a streaming channel, and it talks about how like a cockroach can survive for 2 weeks without its head.
Whoa! Wow!
That's just like really amazing.
That's pretty badass. That's pretty badass.
Yeah.
Go cockroaches. Cockroaches will outlive us for sure. Like, no doubt about that.
There's just no hope. It's just like, oh man.
So I'm wondering if we can invoke, Nate, the audience can connect with as a muse, as a support, maybe get their goosebump response. I'm a goosebump researcher. One of my ways of discerning whether it's a kind of life supporting shapeshifter or a life negating vampiric shapeshifter is positive goosebump response. Like when I'm in ritual practice, or when I'm at a dance, or when somebody says something powerful, I get this kind of fluctuating goosebump response. And is there an image?
I don't know if this will give you, I just love volcanoes. I've been following volcanoes for a long time. And I think, my mind goes to that creator, destroyer. I think about Hawaii, the volcanoes that are, they're both. I think about like Moana, the film, where she has to go and kind of like challenge the Te Fiti,
right?
Te Fiti, but in doing that, and sort of like going on that journey, and putting things right, then we see that beautiful transformation, and we see that like that mother. For me, I think about that idea of going back to the worm story in that Irish chapter, talking about how the earth is the mother, and the serpent is like the protector of the mother and the protector of waterways. But also, as it shapeshifts, it's the serpent is also kind of like a volcanic, underground lava flow that can also be a destroyer, something that we have to be sort of like wary of. I don't know. I mean, that's where my mind goes.
You follow your currents and waterways, and you find your serpent locally, pretty much everywhere in the world. We find the underground water, and you find where he goes seasonally and moves, and you find those currents, the ocean, but in skies and land. The contention of our book is every single culture on the planet has a serpent entity at its foundation, and everybody has story for that. And it's good to look, through the eyes of that, to find that one in the deep dark, and where it bridges across seasonally through all the different layers of reality in order to know reality, in order to have a cosmology that you can align then with other people, because, we're in a post-truth era. It's where the reality, like the ontology, like the actual reality that we're in, and the way of knowing that we have, it's misaligned with our epistemology, our way of thinking. So our way of thinking, our epistemology, that's like what we believe to be true. But then our ontology, which is the actual reality and a way of knowing it, that's what is real. And what's real and true has become split, largely through this online sort of thing, but that populism stuff
It's
that
media.
Megan was talking about
It's
before,
not just online, it's media.
yeah, and that's kind of automated restructuring of our reality that's created this post-truth world where everyone can have their own truth that doesn't have to be fact-based, and nobody agrees with each other, and there's enmity. What's our foundation that we can come into dialogue around? And it's not just putting up a sign saying debate me bro and shouting what is a woman over and over and saying I'm coming to debate in good faith. No. You have to have law. Like our old people say, like a reconciliation in Australia between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. How can you reconcile with people who have no law? You have to bring your law. Old people always ask people, like, tell me your story. Like, no, not the story of your life and your personality and your whatever. I want your story. What's your law? Capital L. What's your law, so I can know how to categorize, the entities that travel with you, because they do. And that snake, he does move. He does travel. He connects with other serpents throughout the world and right up into like the cosmos, the sky camp, infinitely. If you connect with your serpent stories, both from where you are, but where you're from, and all the other stories that you've picked up over the years, dragons and, King Arthur and all these things. And share those stories together and speak from those and understand what the law is, the LAW law that comes through that. What are the principles? A right destruction and wrong destruction, a right creation and wrong creation. Then you'll know when it's right to destroy, and you'll know when it's right to create, and that your creation is actually helping the rest of creation, and not potentially creating a basilisk that's going to come back in time and punish us all.
Yeah, we got it. When you see the rainbow serpent bite its head off, and then do a dance all night long, Megs, I was
it exists
thinking,
out of time. It exists out of time. It's like the whole Heisenberg thing. It's just there's a cloud of probabilities of where it is at any time. So it lives timelessly, and so therefore the point of its death is only one point in an every when. So
you got to just trust. You can't. You might not be able to see it. You just got to trust in the trajectory of your bite.
Yeah.
And then just take a bite, and then just trust that its head is going to be off, and that we're time travelers. And Megs, you're talking about volcanoes. There's this thing called Toba catastrophe theory. Have you ever? So there's an enormous mega volcano that went off about 65 to 70,000 years ago off the coast of Sumatra. And
there it is.
And it put the entire world into a volcanic winter. And, of course, most of us were in Africa, before the mass migrations. And we had to figure out a way to survive, because most of it's a bottleneck hypothesis, because most of our species died. And then, so that's another place I've liked to dream about or dream into, because it's also one of the longest. Blombos Cave in southern Africa, and it was one of the longest continuous sites of human habitation ever. Upwards of 30,000 continuous years.
Right.
Upwards of 30,000 continuous years inside of a cave. So I mean, I'm just thinking about the layers and layers of ancestors and layers, and I went off into this dream of stomping with a tribe of people, and there's a fire, and we're stomping, and there's 30,000 years of strata of human bones and ancestry underneath us. And one of those layers of strata is ash from Mount Toba, that goes really, really deep. And, so I'm just kind of inviting you all to that dance at the moment.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, it might just be here. You mentioned Africa, as the beginning, but that's why you have that number 65,000 years of that site dating, because they can't date anything in Australia past 65,000 years, because then the out of Africa theory doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's more out of Australasia, once you go past 65,000 years. So, they have dated things at 100,000 plus, up around there on that site with the red ochre, dated by thermoluminescence. You can't have that because all the maths doesn't work for out of Africa.
I remember there's a story of Raymond Dart. He found one of these ancient Australopithecus skulls. And in order to discredit this guy, there was these scientists in England who found ancient baboon skulls and proceeded to doctor them up to make them look more human, so that they could discredit Raymond Dart's scientific research and make everything like our species came from the UK, of course. I'm just visualizing these guys with the metal shavings, doctoring up the skulls. We came out of Britain,
The more time that I've spent with this story, or these stories, I should say, and it's been about probably 3 or 4 years. Would you say, Tyson, or a little longer? I've got to the point now where I just see the snake everywhere. And I don't mean I'm seeing snakes everywhere. I mean, it's just apparent to me why snake story and serpent lore is this fundamental underpinning story of creation. And you only have to look at the land. You look at glacial movement, you look at rivers, you look at, volcanic flows. And I was having an awesome conversation last week talking about, how it provides a much more nourishing metaphor for how we connect with each other and with the earth, as opposed to kind of machine-like, metaphors of, understandings of time or, seasonalities or things like that, even borders, our relationship with, land through real estate and all of these kind of, mechanistic and straight lines and clockwork and, and when you think about the snake, there's this meandering and, when you think about how rivers can kind of change their course and, there's this inherent and natural kind of agility and flexibility and
diversity.
And relationality.
Regenerative thing.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like so I think, to sort of answer your question again, if I sort of didn't before really with the volcano kind of image. But it's just, I think it's kind of like finding your own, you start to see it, and I think as you sort of go down the journey of coming into a, I suppose, more peaceful relationship with serpent and snake, as opposed to the kind of binary, like evil versus good or light versus dark or whatever, that there's this kind of like, there's a flow and there's something that's much more, Yeah, it's earth friendly and, it's under the ocean. It's in the ocean. It's in our DNA even. There are these sort of, it's in our veins, like you just look at all of the ways that nature, kind of the patterns of nature, and you start to see the serpent.
Yeah. And his right destruction, it's all about breaking up straight lines, rippling the flat, and diverse, like knocking down the massive animals and replacing them with smaller, many species, so that there's lots more ecological niches, creating that richness and abundance. Volcanoes make jungles. Everywhere you go where volcanoes, when they have a big catastrophic eruption, jungles always follow. And we have that in our stories that are only 10,000 years old, in the south of Australia, but particularly up around Cairns in North Queensland, all of those famous rainforests there, they're only 10,000 years old, and they came after everything was destroyed by volcanoes. So, yeah, it's, the right destruction is always towards creating abundance, diversity, particularly diversity.
But also flows.
Yeah.
Flows like wind, the way that wind moves, it swirls. You see those eddies in the ocean and, and you see the same kind of thing in, stone patterns, even in beehives. When you look at natural beehives, they're not straight lines. They're these beautiful, like I've seen heart shapes, and that's to kind of like enable the flow of, they're able to control the temperature and, I just think that that's my sort of sense of an image is it's don't stick to one image, just kind of allow for that emergence, because it will appear, and it'll appear like you'll be like, oh, whoa, there it is.
Yeah.
You'll see it everywhere.
And
now I've got some goosebumps.
Oh, great. Yeah. And that's been our discussion. Our discussion has been sinuous. The snake has had us, it's been meandering, and there's been these geographies and topologies of, it's diversified. This conversation's been diversified. It's been meandering. And I just, that when it's linear like this, sometimes my students, they need to have this linearized thing. And I don't like it. I'm an author too. And my authoring is circuitous, and I just really appreciate being in this meandering, creative making with y'all. So thank you so much for being there with me here and meandering with me and snaking around and being there for my first threesome, right? Snaking around into my first threesome here on the podcast.
Just brought you in gently.
And, check out Snake Talk, y'all, people that are listening. And these guys are great, and their writing is wonderful, and Tyson's books are just inspiring and wonderful. Anything else you want to say before we orient to closure?
Release the Epstein files. That's it.
Yeah. By the way, we all agree. Hey, Bushman, it's on. Yeah. Okay, it's on.
Yeah.
We
have the rumble in the jungle. Me versus like a 4-foot dude with a poison arrow. Yeah.
And all right. Take care, you two. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care.
And you too.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Boundless Body Podcast. Please like us, share, subscribe, and until next time, stabilize, catalyze, and thrive